you are not imagining it. There is a specific kind of loneliness that shows up when you outgrow the people around you. And it is not the same as being single. And it is not the same as being isolated. And it is not the same as not being invited. It is the loneliness of being in the room with people you love and realizing you are no longer speaking the same language. It is the loneliness of feeling yourself shrink mid-sentence because you can tell the truth is going to make it awkward. It is the loneliness of watching the same old dynamics loop again and again and realizing you cannot unsee the pattern anymore. And if you have been feeling this, I want to start with the most stabilizing truth. This loneliness is not proof you are broken. It is proof you are changing. And the reason it hurts so much is because outgrowing is not a clean exit. It is a slow separation while you are still standing next to each other. It is grief without a funeral. It is loss without permission to call it loss. So, in this episode, I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to explain what is actually happening psychologically when you outgrow people. I'm going to explain why they often react the way they do, and I'm going to show you how to move through this without becoming arrogant, without becoming cold, and without abandoning yourself to keep the old peace. And there is one piece near the end that most people never hear, the part that turns this loneliness into power. Not loud power, quiet power, the kind that makes you unshakable. Stay with me for that, because it changes how you interpret everything you are feeling right now. First, what does it actually mean to outgrow someone? It does not mean you became better than them. It means your internal operating system changed. Your standards changed. Your tolerance changed. Your appetite changed. You became more honest with yourself about what costs you peace. Outgrowing is when your nervous system stops finding the old chaos familiar. Outgrowing is when you no longer get rewarded by the same jokes, the same complaints, the same drama, the same gossip, the same circular arguments, the same avoidance, the same excuses. Outgrowing is when you stop getting the dopamine hit from being the rescuer, the fixer, the entertainer, the therapist, the reliable one, the one who keeps the group stable. For a long time, that role might have given you identity. It might have made you feel needed. It might have made you feel safe. But then, something shifts. Maybe you heal. Maybe you build a life. Maybe you start respecting your time. Maybe you stop numbing. Maybe you start seeing how your patterns were training people how to treat you. And when that happens, you do not just change your habits, you change the social contract. You silently break an agreement that everyone got comfortable with. And here is why the loneliness hits immediately. Most people do not bond through values. They bond through roles. They bond through repetition. They bond through shared coping. They bond through who is allowed to be confident, who is allowed to be sensitive, who is allowed to be messy, who is allowed to be ambitious, who is allowed to be the one who tries. And when you outgrow, you disrupt the role map. You are no longer playing your assigned part. That is why people can love you and still resist your growth. Because your growth threatens the structure that kept them comfortable. This is not always malicious. It is often unconscious, but it is predictable. Let me make it even clearer. There are 3 hidden reasons outgrowing feels lonely. Reason 1 is identity mismatch. When you evolve, you start choosing based on your values, not your hunger. You start choosing based on your future, not your mood. You start choosing based on what is true, not what is popular. That means your conversations change, Your humor changes. Your priorities change. And suddenly, you notice that many connections were built on the old version of you performing. Performing enthusiasm, performing agreement, performing availability, performing the role of the one who never makes it hard. When you stop performing, the connection can feel thinner, not because you are cold, but because the relationship was fueled by your output. Reason 2 is nervous system distance. This one is subtle but powerful. Your body can feel safe with certain people because it learned their pattern. It learned what to expect. It learned how to brace. It learned how to accommodate. That can feel like belonging, even if it is not healthy. When you outgrow, you stop bracing. You stop accommodating. You stop doing the emotional labor that made the room feel stable. That means you feel more yourself, but you also feel less fused. You feel the boundary. And the boundary can feel like loneliness at first, because your body is used to merging for safety. Reason 3 is grief without permission. There is no social script for this. People understand breakups. People understand moving cities. People understand death. But people do not always understand outgrowing. So you feel grief, but you cannot point to a dramatic event. Nothing happened, but everything changed. And that is exactly why it can feel so heavy. Now let us talk about the part that confuses you the most. Why do people sometimes react badly when you outgrow them? Why do they suddenly call you different, or distant, or too serious, or too sensitive, or too much, or too quiet, or arrogant, or fake? Here is the uncomfortable truth. Your growth forces comparison. Even if you never say a word, your behavior becomes a mirror. When you start saying no, it highlights where they do not say no. When you start taking your life seriously, it highlights where they numb. When you stop gossiping, it highlights what the group uses as bonding. When you stop complaining, it highlights how much of the relationship was built on complaining. When you start building, it highlights who is stuck. And when people feel compared, they often try to restore the old hierarchy. That can look like teasing you back into your role. That can look like minimizing your goals. That can look like turning your boundaries into a joke. That can look like suddenly expecting you to prove that you still love them. Pay attention to that one. When you outgrow, some people will test your loyalty, not with words, with pressure. They will create situations where the old you would fold. The old you would over-explain. The old you would over-give. The old you would over-accommodate. And if you fold, the group relaxes. If you hold your boundary, they feel the change. This is why your growth can feel like it creates conflict, even when you are being calm. Because calm boundaries are the most threatening thing to a system built on emotional leverage. Now, here is where people sabotage themselves. They notice the tension, and they think the solution is to shrink. They think the solution is to become easier again. They think the solution is to go back to the old version to keep the connection. And that is the exact moment you have to understand what is actually at stake. Because this is not just about friendships, or family, or a partner. This is about your internal authority. Outgrowing is a test of whether you will abandon yourself to maintain belonging. And if you have a history of people-pleasing, or anxious attachment, or being the responsible one, this test will feel brutal. Because your nervous system equates belonging with survival. It learned that being liked equals being safe. So when your growth threatens belonging, your body sounds the alarm. You start thinking, maybe I am too much. Maybe I am selfish. Maybe I am becoming cold. Maybe I should explain myself better. Maybe I should soften it. Maybe I should not change so fast. But listen carefully. This discomfort is not evidence you are wrong. It is evidence you are withdrawing from a pattern. It is the body learning a new type of safety. Now, let us make this practical. How do you outgrow people without becoming lonely forever? Step 1 is to name what is happening without shaming anyone. You do not need to villainize them. You also do not need to pretend it is nothing. You are allowed to say, "This connection is no longer aligned with who I am becoming." That sentence alone will stabilize you because it stops you from trying to force compatibility where it no longer exists. Step 2 is to stop over-explaining your growth. Here is a rule that will save you years. People who benefit from the old you will never fully understand the new you. Not because they are evil, but because your change removes their access. And access is addictive. If someone could rely on you to regulate their emotions, your boundary feels like rejection. If someone could rely on you to stay small so they feel big, your growth feels like betrayal. If someone could rely on you to always agree, your honesty feels like conflict. So do not argue for your evolution. Do not present your growth like a court case. Your life is not a debate. You do not need permission to evolve. And the more you explain, the more you invite negotiation. Step 3 is to build a bridge relationship type. This is the part most people miss. They think outgrowing means cutting everyone off or keeping everyone close. But there is a third option: redesigning closeness. You can love someone and reduce access. You can respect someone and limit intimacy. You can stay kind without staying available. This is not cold. This is accurate. It is emotional maturity. It is the ability to hold warmth and boundaries at the same time. Step 4 is to expect the loneliness wave and not panic. There is a phase where you outgrow the old environment before you find the new one. That gap is where people relapse. That gap is where you think, maybe I should go back. Maybe I am making a mistake. Maybe I am too alone. But that gap is not a sign you should return to the old pattern. It is a sign you are in transition. You cannot skip the hallway. You cannot teleport from the old room to the new room without walking through the quiet part. So treat the loneliness as a passage, not as a verdict. Step 5 is to replace the bonding mechanism. If your old connections were fueled by drama, you will feel bored at first when you stop. If your old connections were fueled by being needed, you will feel useless at first when you stop rescuing. If your old connections were fueled by gossip, you will feel disconnected at first when you stop feeding that. That is normal. But you have to build new bonding. Bonding through shared values, bonding through craft, bonding through growth, bonding through calm, bonding through truth. This is why people who evolve often feel lonely for a while. They are detoxing from a social dopamine pattern. Now I want to address a fear I know you have. What if I outgrow everyone and end up alone? Here is the real answer. If you evolve with integrity, you do not end up alone. You end up less surrounded. And there is a difference. Less surrounded means you have fewer people, but you have more reality. You have more peace. You have more self-respect. You have more time. And then something surprising happens. When you stop spending energy maintaining misaligned connections, you become available for aligned ones. The aligned people can find you, but not when your life is full of noise. Now, let us talk about family, because for many people, that is where the loneliness hurts the most. When you outgrow friends, you can drift. When you outgrow a partner, you can separate. But when you outgrow family dynamics, it can feel like you are betraying your origin. Here is the rule. You can honor where you came from without living there mentally. You can love people without allowing them to define you. You can respect elders without surrendering your autonomy. And the way you do that is not with more explanation. It is with calm repetition, short sentences, clean boundaries, consistent behavior. You do not argue. You do not try to convert them. You show them the new standard by living it. And yes, they may call it disrespect at first. They may say you changed. They may say you became distant. But over time, the ones who have genuine love will adjust. The ones who only had control will escalate. That information is painful, but it is also clarity. And clarity is what frees you. Now, I promised you the piece near the end that turns loneliness into power. Here it is. The loneliness you feel is not only about losing people. It is also about losing the version of yourself that belonged there. That is why it hits so deep. You are grieving an identity. You are grieving the role that made you feel safe. You are grieving the fantasy that you could evolve and keep everything the same. That fantasy is what keeps people stuck. The fantasy that you can grow without loss. But growth always costs something. The question is whether it costs your future or your comfort. And when you understand that, you stop interpreting loneliness as failure. You start interpreting it as the cost of integrity. Now, let us make this even more grounded. How do you know you have outgrown someone for real, not just because you are in a mood? Here are 3 signs. 1. You consistently feel worse after contact, not temporarily, consistently. 2. You notice you have to edit yourself to be accepted. 3. Your growth is met with subtle punishment, not disagreement, punishment. Mockery, withdrawal, guilt, drama, pressure to return to your role. Those are not small things. Those are indicators that the connection is built on your compliance. And if that is true, the loneliness you feel is actually your nervous system learning to stop paying with yourself. Now, what do you do when you still love them? This is where people get stuck. They think love means access. Love does not mean access. Love can mean distance with kindness. Love can mean boundaries with respect. Love can mean ending the conversation early. Love can mean not sharing everything anymore. Love can mean wishing them well without returning to the old loop. That is adulthood. And if you can hold that, you stop being controlled by guilt. Because guilt often appears when you stop being useful, not when you do something wrong. You need to learn the difference. Now let us talk about the social consequence that scares you. The quiet backlash. People who are used to you being available will call you different. People who are used to you being agreeable will call you difficult. People who are used to you being the one who carries emotional weight will call you selfish when you stop. This is not always personal. It is often withdrawal. They are withdrawing from the version of you they had access to. And withdrawal makes people reactive. So your job is to not take their reaction as a diagnosis of your character. Your job is to stay calm and consistent. Because consistency is what teaches people how to relate to the new you. Let me give you a practical script for the moments people pressure you. I hear you. I am comfortable with my decision. That is it. No essay, no defense, no debate. You will feel the urge to soften it. You will feel the urge to explain. That urge is your old conditioning. Let it pass. Hold the line. You are not being cruel, you are being clear. Now, let us address the final fear. If I outgrow them, does that mean I am better than them? No. It means you are responsible for your life. Outgrowing is not superiority. It is selection. It is choosing environments that match your nervous system and your values. Some people will evolve later. Some will never. That is not your job to manage. Your job is to stop betraying yourself to keep the old belonging. And once you do that, something beautiful happens. The loneliness becomes quieter. The room in your mind becomes larger. Your decisions become cleaner. Your relationships become fewer but deeper. And you start to feel a new kind of belonging. Belonging to yourself first, because that is the real foundation. If you belong to yourself, you can handle the transition. You can handle the hallway. You can handle the silence. You can handle the temporary distance. And you will attract people who do not require you to shrink to stay close. That is the point. You are not here to be understandable to everyone. You are here to be true. And the people who can meet truth will find you. Welcome to PsychBond. You're safe here.